He climbed up the difficult boulder-strewn ascent, walked along the slopes that were nearly perpendicular cliffs, and pulled himself up over more rocks. He was unused to walking on this, and the weather was fickle, so process was slow. Though he climbed and climbed, he still couldn't see the peak. Whenever he saw monsters, he had to hide and wait for them to pass. The footing was too unstable. He doubted he'd be able to kill anything. The nights were terribly cold too. He would huddle behind rocks and curl himself up as much as possible, but his teeth wouldn't stop chattering. And being curled up in such a unnatural posture made his joints ache by morning. He started wondering, with some regret, if this had been a reckless decision. But the foot of the mountain was already far behind. Thinking about how many days he'd climbed so far, he hesitated to turn back. Before long, the food he had on hand ran out, but he didn't encounter any monsters. He felt he could kill without falling. All he ever saw was winged monsters, and nothing he could hunt. It was the most he could do to press himself against a rock and wait for them to pass. He hadn't found a wellspring at one point. He wouldn't have collapsed before he could even make it up the mountain. His burned Chalicerata leg powder had run out long ago, so he drank the spring water as is. Either that did it, or there was poison. Or there was poison in the hanging mist. As he approached the summit, he started to have a splitting headache. Just a little bit of walking would leave him panting, and he rested many times. Though he knew he was close to the summit, his legs wouldn't obey. He was probably weak because he hadn't eaten anything. But maybe it would have been the same even if he'd had food. He felt terribly nauseated, and he couldn't drink water anymore. But he continued to climb desperately, nevertheless, for the sake of seeing just one living human. Even if he couldn't meet them directly, he wanted to know there was one village left. He wanted to know there was one village left where people lived. From the mountain's peak, he'd be able to see a ways. Maybe he could find one inhabited dwelling nearly on hands. One inhabited dwelling. Nearly on hands and knees, he arrived at the peak. The mist had cleared. That's the ocean, It was a dark color, somewhere between green and grey, drawing a great arc against the sky. Nothing about it was anywhere close to beautiful. Why had his grandmother said she wanted to see that? It was nothing but unbroken wasteland from the foot of the mountain to the sea. He strained his eyes, searching for the remains of human habitation. Even from a distance, he could tell this place was even more ruined than the land where he lived. It was just like the empty white desert his grandmother and her people abandoned. Before he knew what he was doing, he'd sunk to his knees. He had been so certain there was someone on the other side of the mountains, but there were still survivors. His hope wasn't in vain, but despite his struggles, his hopes had been dashed. He should have known it from the start. People couldn't live near the ocean. These tall mountains blocked the winds from the ocean and had enabled their village to last as long as it had. After constantly moving in search of the land that was just a little safer, the last place his people had arrived had been their village. No, there was still hope, even if he couldn't find any living humans, even if he wasn't the last one standing. He just had to search for something that could change that fate. He couldn't give up. The goddess would open the door for those who never gave up. Until the door was open to him, he could not give up. He hesitated, wondering which side of the mountain he should descend. But he decided to be brave and go down the ocean side. He was looking for a miracle. He wasn't trying to bring those who had gone back to life. He was going to change the fate that led them to die. If he was going to wish for something so unthinkable, then he should head to the more dangerous land. Walking in this uninhabitable region might destroy his body, but so what? He wouldn't mind dying if it meant granting his wish, even if his existence disappeared without a trace, and nobody remembered. Existence disappeared without a trace, and nobody remembered him anymore. Even if he was erased from history itself, he didn't care. If it meant a future where his friends, his village, and so many more could live, he resolved himself and stood up. He encouraged his weakening legs and descended the rocky slope. His headache and the ringing in his ears never stopped, and walking never stopped. and walking even a little made him gasp for air. He wasn't sure if he could make it to the bottom of the mountain like this. Stay strong. If your heart is weak, your body will be weakened too. Keep on this journey until the goddess opens the door, no matter what it takes to survive, he told himself. And right as he was taking one heavy step forward, his vision suddenly shook, and he felt a shock through his whole body. The rock at his feet had crumbled, as the rocks and drift pulled at his skin. He realized he was rolling down the slope. He immediately tried to reach out with a hand, handing down with a hand to grab onto something, but he couldn't stop. The force pulling him along was incredibly powerful, and he was getting beaten black and blue. Just for an instant, he felt his consciousness fading, but he opened his eyes again. He saw the sky. He slid. His slide had stopped. He moved his arm, trying to push himself up, and a sharp pain instantly shot through it. He tried to clench his teeth and tasted blood. The sky was unnaturally dark, and he panicked, thinking his eyes had been damaged. But that wasn't it. Evening was falling. He'd been unconscious for much longer than an instant. Gingerly, he tried moving his right arm, and had managed to obey. But his left arm was no good. The shooting pain had given way to total numbness. He shifted his eyes towards the faraway peak, and he shuddered. He shuddered when he finally realized just how far he'd rolled. Leaning to the right, he managed to get himself upright. But it took even more time to stand. With every breath he inhaled, his chest and back hurt, as if he were trapped in a vice. But that was as far as he got. Though he could stand, he couldn't take a step. His knees folded, and his body hit rock again. It was excruciating, and yet he couldn't even moan. He couldn't die here. He'd failed to meet any living humans, much less a Xlll-2. Not yet. He hadn't accomplished any of his goals on this journey.